"You're dead when we get home." The words didn't whisper. They didn't suggest. They detonated across the Zenith's dining room, shattering the carefully curated atmosphere of clinking crystal and hushed business deals, making Madison Young's heart stop mid-beat as she sat frozen across from the man who promised he'd changed. The water glass had simply tipped. That was all. Madison's trembling hand reaching for her napkin, the condensation making her fingers slip. The glass tilting just enough to send a stream of water across the white tablecloth toward Gabriel Perry's designer suit. Such an innocent accident. Such an unforgivable crime in Gabriel's world. The fury that twisted Gabriel's clean-cut features wasn't new. Madison had seen it before. In their bedroom when she'd mentioned taking night classes. In the hallway when her sister had texted to check in. In the kitchen when she'd seasoned dinner wrong, but never in public. Never so loud and unrestrained. Never so absolutely terrifying. The couple at the window table glanced over, then immediately away, their faces painted with that practiced blend of shock and calculated indifference that screamed, "Not our business." The waiter pivoting toward the kitchen suddenly discovered urgent tasks elsewhere. The hostess became deeply absorbed in her reservation screen. Nobody was going to intervene. Nobody ever did. 2 years of this. 2 years of monitoring every gesture, questioning every choice, rehearsing every sentence before speaking. 2 years of watching her bright, hopeful life fade to sepia as Gabriel methodically amputated everyone and everything that reminded her she used to be whole. Her career ambitions dismissed as distractions from their relationship. Her friends suddenly branded as jealous or untrustworthy, or secretly trying to sabotage them. Her family too intrusive when they noticed the way she'd stopped wearing colors, stopped laughing, stopped being Madison. Madison's eyes fixed on the yellow fabric of her dress. The cheerful sunshine shade that had felt like armor when she'd put it on this morning now felt like a cruel joke. She'd chosen it deliberately, desperately, a silent rebellion that whispered, "I'm still here, I'm still bright, I'm still alive." But she wasn't. Not really. Not for a long time. She couldn't swallow past the fear crushing her windpipe, couldn't lift her gaze from the spreading water stain, couldn't think beyond the car ride home, the 40-minute drive where Gabriel's rage would have room to expand, where there would be no witnesses, no escape routes, no one to hear her scream. She'd seen that expression on Gabriel's face before. It meant there would be a reckoning. It meant pain in places her clothes would hide. It meant apologies she'd have to accept, promises she'd have to believe, another piece of herself she'd have to surrender to survive another week. I said, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Gabriel continued, his voice dropping to that measured, controlled register that was somehow worse than the shouting. When he yelled, at least the danger was visible. When he went quiet like this, the threat became infinite. "You embarrass me in front of these people. You think there won't be consequences?" The words formed in Madison's throat. "It was an accident. I'm sorry. Please," but they dissolved before reaching her lips. Apologizing would only feed it. Silence might make it worse. There was no right answer. There never was. But someone was watching. Madison felt it before she saw it. A weight in the air, a shift in the room's energy. Her peripheral vision caught movement. A figure rising from a corner booth she hadn't noticed before. Not rushing, not dramatic, just standing. The man was all sharp angles and deliberate stillness. Dark hair slicked back, a suit that cost more than Madison's monthly rent, and crawling up from his collar, impossible to miss even in the dim lighting intricate tattoos that marked his neck like a battle map. His eyes weren't on Gabriel, they were on Madison, dark, unblinking, assessing, and for the first time in 2 years, Madison felt something other than fear. She felt seen. Welcome to the channel. Before we find out if Madison survives the night, I want you to look at the man screaming in the thumbnail. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does his expression terrify you? Rate it in the comments right now. Madison pressed her napkin against her cheeks, trying to blot away the tears before Gabriel noticed them, and found another reason to escalate. The fabric came away damp, mascara-stained, a small flag of surrender she quickly hid in her lap. Her chest hitched with the effort of keeping the sobs silent, swallowing them down where they burned like acid in her throat. "Are you crying now? Really?" Gabriel's voice cut through her attempt at composure. "You spill water on me, ruin my meeting, and now you're the victim? That's perfect. That's just perfect, Madison." His hands gestured wildly as he spoke, and Madison flinched despite the table between them. The couple at the window had already paid their check. The businessman at the bar was suddenly fascinated by his phone. The entire restaurant had become a stage where everyone pretended not to notice the performance unfolding in their midst. "I bring you to the nicest restaurant in the city. I'm trying to close a deal that could make my career, and you can't even sit still without causing a scene." Do you know how pathetic that makes me look? Do you even care? Madison wanted to tell him that his clients had left 10 minutes ago, that they'd made excuses about early morning meetings and slipped away the moment Gabriel's voice had started rising. She wanted to tell him that nobody was looking at her with judgment, they were looking at him with disgust. But speaking would only make everything worse. It always did. So she nodded. She murmured something that might have been an apology. She let Gabriel's words wash over her like a toxic tide, each accusation eroding another piece of the person she used to be. 3 tables away, Sunji had been watching since the moment the water glass fell. He'd seen the woman's hand shake, had observed the way she'd reached for the glass not with carelessness but with the careful precision of someone who knew mistakes had consequences, had noticed how her fingers trembled even before the glass tipped, how her whole body seemed to exist in a state of perpetual tension, wound so tight she might shatter at a touch. Sunji understood tension. He'd built an empire on understanding it, when to apply it, when to release it, when to recognize it in others and know exactly what it meant. The man doing the shouting was easy to read, loud, insecure, the type who needed an audience for his dominance because without witnesses, he couldn't convince himself the dominance was real. Sunji had dealt with 1,000 men like this. Men who mistook volume for authority, who thought fear and respect were the same currency. They never lasted long in his world. The loud ones always broke first. But the woman interested him more. She wore yellow, bright, defiant yellow, but held herself like she was trying to disappear. The contradiction fascinated him. It spoke of someone fighting to remember who they were while simultaneously trying to survive by erasing themselves. He recognized that battle. He'd seen it in the eyes of people trapped in situations where escape seemed impossible, where every day was a negotiation with danger, where hope became a liability too expensive to maintain. Sunji lifted his glass of whiskey, took a measured sip, and continued watching. His men, seated at the adjacent table disguised as business associates, had noticed his attention shift. They knew that look. It meant their boss had identified something that required action. They waited, still and ready, because Sunji never moved without calculation. The tattoos on Sunji's neck were a history written in ink. Each line, each symbol, each carefully placed mark represented a story most people couldn't read and wouldn't want to if they could. The chrysanthemum blooming beneath his jawline, the scattered stars trailing down toward his collarbone, the angular script in a language few in this city could decipher. They marked him as someone who existed in a world parallel to this one, where power operated by different rules and respect was earned in currencies these restaurant patrons would never understand. Where the shouting man was all chaos and flailing energy, Sunji was stillness embodied. He didn't need to move to command space. Didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His presence alone altered the atmosphere of any room he entered, a gravitational force that bent everything toward him, whether people realized it or not. He watched as the woman Madison, he'd heard the man call her, tried to make herself smaller. Watched as she folded her shoulders inward, as she ducked her head, as she employed every survival mechanism available to someone who'd learned that visibility meant vulnerability. He watched the man continue his performance, gaining confidence from her silence, feeding off her fear like it was oxygen. And Sunji made a decision. It wasn't impulsive. Sunji didn't do impulsive. It was calculated in the span of 3 seconds, weighing variables and outcomes with the cold efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years making choices where hesitation meant death. He saw the trajectory of this night, the car ride home, the closed door, the absence of witnesses, the inevitability of escalation. He saw it because he'd seen it before, because violence had patterns and this pattern was unmistakable. He set down his whiskey glass with deliberate precision, the soft click of crystal on marble somehow audible despite the ambient noise. His men tensed, ready. The woman's eyes flickered in his direction for just a moment, drawn by some instinct she probably couldn't name. And their gazes locked across the dim restaurant. Sunji didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer any of the social niceties that might have softened the moment. He simply held her gaze and let her see what he was. Not a savior, not a hero, but someone who recognized what was happening and had the power to stop it. Then he stood, and the room's energy shifted entirely. Gabriel's hand clamped around Madison's wrist like a vice, yanking her up from her chair with enough force that her knee slammed against the table edge. The wine glasses rattled. Her napkin fell to the floor. The sudden violence of it sent a shock of pain racing up her arm, but she'd learned long ago that crying out only made things worse. "We're leaving. Now." Gabriel's voice was low, venomous, meant only for her ears as he hauled her toward the exit. His fingers dug into her flesh, finding the exact spot where bruises from last week hadn't quite faded, pressing into tender skin with the precision of someone who knew exactly where it would hurt most. "You want to embarrass me?" Fine. We'll finish this conversation at home where you can't run to an audience for sympathy. Madison stumbled in her heels, struggling to keep pace, as Gabriel dragged her past tables of people who suddenly found their desserts fascinating. Her free hand clutched at her purse. Her only thought, the desperate calculation of whether she could reach her phone, whether anyone would answer if she called, whether there was any point in trying. The exit was 20 feet away. 15, 10, and then there was someone standing in front of them. Gabriel pulled up short, nearly jerking Madison off her feet. "Excuse me," he spat, trying to sidestep around the obstacle. But the man moved with him. A subtle shift that maintained the blockage without seeming aggressive. Just present, just immovable. "Get out of my way." Gabriel's voice climbed back toward that dangerous volume, the veneer of control cracking. "This is a private matter. Move." Sunji didn't move. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, his expression neutral. His eyes fixed not on Gabriel, but on the white-knuckled grip around Madison's wrist. The tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe in the dim lighting, shadows playing across the inked lines like something alive. "Let her go," Sunji said. His voice was quiet, conversational, the kind of tone someone might use to comment on the weather. Gabriel's face flushed crimson. "Who the hell do you think you are? Do you know who I am? I'm a senior director at Meridian Capital. I have lawyers who would bury you for even looking at me wrong. Now get out of my way before I have security throw you out." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere in the background, the restaurant manager had appeared, hovering nervously near the host stand, clearly torn between intervening and staying as far away from this situation as possible. The remaining diners had given up all pretense of eating. This was better than theater. Sunji tilted his head slightly, studying Gabriel the way an entomologist might study an insect. "I know you are a loud man in a quiet room," he said, his voice still barely above a whisper. "I know you think volume makes you powerful. I know you grip her wrist because you cannot grip your own fear. What the fuck did you just—" Gabriel started, but Sunji continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I know that when we walk outside, there are cameras. I know your name is Gabriel Perry. I know you live at 2847 Ashland Avenue, Unit 12B. I know your mother's name is Patricia, and she lives in Scottsdale and she calls you every Sunday at 10 a.m. Sunji paused, letting each detail land like a stone in still water. "I know many things, Gabriel Perry. And I know that if you do not release her wrist in the next 3 seconds, you will learn things about yourself you did not know were possible to learn." There was no heat in the words, no anger, just cold, factual certainty delivered in that same quiet voice. But something in Sunji's eyes had changed, something Madison could see even from where she stood, frozen and forgotten in Gabriel's slackening grip. It was the look of someone who'd made promises like this before and kept them. Gabriel's hand spasmed open. Madison's wrist came free, angry red marks already blooming where his fingers had been. She stumbled backward, cradling her arm against her chest, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "You're threatening me?" Gabriel's voice cracked on the last word, bravado and fury fighting for dominance over the fear that was clearly creeping into his bones. "You're threatening me in front of all these witnesses? I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you—" "You will do nothing," Sunji interrupted. And this time there was something in his voice that made the room temperature drop. "You will walk out of this restaurant alone. You will go home alone. You will never contact Madison Young again. You will forget her name, her face, her existence." "Like hell I will. She's my girlfriend. She lives in my apartment. She is not your anything." Sanji took 1 step forward, just one, but it was enough to make Gabriel take 2 steps back. "She is a person you have hurt for the last time. Do you understand me, Gabriel Perry? The last time." Gabriel's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His face cycled through rage, indignation, confusion, and finally, something that looked like genuine fear. He looked at Madison, then back at Sunji, then at the restaurant full of witnesses who had watched him scream death threats at a woman over spilled water. "This isn't over," Gabriel said, but his voice had lost all its conviction. It was the desperate bluster of someone who'd already lost and knew it. "Yes," Sunji said simply. "It is." For a long moment, nothing happened. The entire restaurant held its breath. Then Gabriel turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit, shouldering past the manager, slamming through the doors hard enough that they rattled in their frames. Through the windows, they could see him on the sidewalk, pacing, pulling out his phone, his mouth moving in what was probably a string of curses no one could hear. Sunji turned to Madison. She was shaking, her yellow dress trembling like a flower in a storm, her dark eyes wide with shock, and something that might have been hope, but was too afraid to name itself. "Do you want to leave with him?" Sunji asked, and Madison realized it was a real question. He would let her go, would let her walk back into that nightmare if she chose it. He was offering her something no one had offered in 2 years. A choice. Madison looked at the doors where Gabriel had vanished. Then she looked at the man with the neck tattoos and the quiet voice and the power to make her abuser flee with nothing but words. "No," she whispered. Then louder, stronger. "No, I don't." Sunji nodded once. "Then you won't. Gabriel thinks because he bought dinner, he owns Madison. If you hate men who treat women like property, hit that like button right now. Let's show Gabriel he's outnumbered." The moment Madison spoke the word no, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted like a pressure change before a storm. Sunji made a gesture so subtle Madison almost missed it. Just 2 fingers lifted slightly from where his hand rested at his side. But the response was immediate. 3 men materialized from different corners of the dining room. Not rushed, not aggressive. They simply stood from their tables, adjusted their suit jackets, and moved with the synchronized precision of people who'd worked together for years. One positioned himself near the exit doors. Another took a spot by the host stand. The third moved to the window, his body angled toward the street where Gabriel was still visible, pacing and shouting into his phone. They didn't draw weapons, didn't crack knuckles or issue threats. They just existed in strategic positions, creating a human barrier between Madison and the doors, between her and Gabriel, between her past and whatever came next. Their faces were blank, professional, the kind of neutral expression that suggested they'd done this before and would do it again without a second thought. The restaurant manager, a thin man in his 50s with sweat beading on his upper lip, approached Sunji with the careful steps of someone approaching a sleeping tiger. "Mr. Sun, is everything should I call?" "No need," Sunji said, his attention still on Madison. "The gentleman who left will not be returning tonight. If he attempts to, your security will escort him away." "Yes." It wasn't really a question. The manager nodded so vigorously his glasses slipped down his nose. "Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you need, Mr. Sun." Madison watched this exchange with a strange sense of disconnection, like she was floating somewhere above her own body, observing events happening to someone else. The yellow dress that had felt like armor this morning now felt like evidence, too bright, too visible, marking her as the center of a scene she desperately wished would end. Her wrist throbbed where Gabriel had grabbed her. Her legs felt unsteady, adrenaline and fear warring with a cautious, fragile relief she didn't quite trust yet. Through the window, she could see Gabriel still on his phone, gesturing wildly. He looked up at the restaurant, seemed to notice the men positioned at various points, and his expression transformed into something ugly and desperate. He took a step toward the entrance. The man stationed by the door didn't move, didn't even look at Gabriel, just stood there, immovable as a wall, and somehow that was enough. Gabriel stopped. He pointed at the restaurant, shouted something inaudible through the glass, then turned and stormed down the sidewalk, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his lawyer or his brother or someone he thought could fix this situation through connections and threats. "Can you walk?" Sunji asked Madison, and she realized she'd been gripping the back of a chair for support, her knuckles white against the dark wood. "I think so," she managed, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, small, uncertain. She hated how weak she sounded, but couldn't seem to locate the strength to change it. Sunji extended his hand, not to grab or pull, but offering it palm up in the space between them. An invitation, not a demand. Madison stared at it for a long moment. This stranger's hand that had just dismantled her entire world with nothing but quiet words and subtle gestures. She thought about Gabriel's hand on her wrist, the pain and the pressure and the promise of worse to come. This was different. This was a choice she could make. She took his hand. His grip was firm but careful, supporting without controlling, and he led her toward the elevator bank at the back of the restaurant, away from the windows and the street and Gabriel's rage. His men fell into formation around them without being asked, creating a protective corridor through the dining room. Madison could feel every eye in the restaurant on her, could imagine what they were thinking. Who was this woman? What had she gotten herself into? Was she trading one dangerous man for another? But Sunji kept walking with that same unhurried pace, his presence alone seeming to deflect their judgment, and Madison focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on breathing, on not collapsing until she was somewhere private. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Sunji stepped inside, still holding her hand gently, and Madison followed. His men did not. They remained in the corridor, silent sentinels, as the doors slid closed and sealed Madison and Sunji in a small box of polished mirrors and soft lighting. The silence was absolute. Madison could hear her own breathing, too fast, too shallow, could see herself in the mirrored walls, her mascara smudged, her yellow dress rumpled, her expression shell-shocked. She looked like a survivor of something catastrophic, someone who'd just walked out of a burning building and couldn't quite process that they were safe yet. Sun Ji released her hand and took a step back, giving her space. He didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances or explanations. Didn't ask if she was okay because the answer was obvious. He just stood there, his tattooed neck partially visible above his crisp white collar, his hands now clasped loosely in front of him, his eyes fixed on the descending floor numbers above the door. The elevator hummed as it dropped, floor after floor, carrying them away from the zenith and its panoramic views and its terrible memories. Madison's mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. Who was this man? What did he want? Why had he intervened? What happened now? Where was he taking her? Was she safe? Was she in danger of a different kind? But somehow, asking felt impossible. The silence felt fragile, like speaking might shatter whatever strange spell had allowed her to escape Gabriel's orbit, might wake her up to discover this was all a dream, and she was actually in Gabriel's car right now, heading home to face the consequences he'd promised. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto a private lobby Madison had never seen before, all dark marble and discreet lighting. A black car waited at the curb outside, sleek and expensive, its engine running. Sun Ji looked at her then, really looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. "You do not have to come with me," he said, and she realized he meant it. "I can arrange a car to take you anywhere you want to go. A hotel, a friend's house, the police station if that is what you choose." Madison thought about her apartment, Gabriel's apartment. Really, the lease was in his name. Thought about her clothes in his closet, her toothbrush in his bathroom, her life reduced to possessions she'd need his permission to retrieve. Thought about her phone, probably already filling with his messages, his apologies that would turn to threats, his promises and his rage. Thought about going back. Thought about never going back. "Where would you take me?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Sun Ji said. "Somewhere he cannot reach you. Somewhere you can decide what comes next without fear." Madison looked at the car, then at Sun Ji, then at her own reflection in the lobby's dark windows. The woman staring back at her in the yellow dress looked terrified, but she also looked like someone who'd just been given a chance. "Okay," Madison whispered. "Take me somewhere safe." The car ride passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. Madison sat in the back seat next to Sun Ji, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking, watching the city slide past the tinted windows. She expected them to head toward the docks, or some industrial district, or one of those neighborhoods where police rarely ventured. Places she'd seen in movies where criminals conducted their business behind rusted doors and flickering neon signs. Instead, they drove toward the financial district, pulling into the underground garage of a gleaming tower that pierced the skyline like a glass and steel needle. The building was new, expensive, the kind of place where penthouse apartments sold for prices that made headlines. Madison had walked past it once or twice, craning her neck to see the top floors, never imagining she'd be inside. The elevator they entered required a keycard and a fingerprint scan. It bypassed every floor, climbing straight to the top with the smooth efficiency of technology that cost more than most people's cars. Madison's stomach dropped with the ascent, though she couldn't tell if it was the speed or the surreal nature of everything happening. When the doors opened, Madison stepped into a space that defied every expectation she'd been building during the silent ride. The penthouse stretched before her in an expanse of clean lines and minimalist elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around three sides, offering a panoramic view of the city glittering below like a circuit board of lights. The furniture was sparse, but clearly expensive, low-slung leather sofas, a dining table of black wood that looked like a single carved piece, abstract art on the walls that Madison suspected were originals. This wasn't a criminal's den. This was where architects won awards. "I thought," Madison started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence without offending the man who'd just saved her life. "You thought it would be darker," Sun Ji said, not unkindly. He moved through the space with the ease of someone completely at home, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over a chair. The tattoos on his neck extended down beneath his collar. She could see now, intricate patterns that disappeared under the white fabric of his shirt. Most people do. He walked to the kitchen, all stainless steel and marble countertops, and filled a glass with water from a filtered tap. He brought it to Madison, who realized her throat was raw from crying, from fear, from everything. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the glass with trembling hands. The water was cold and clean, and she drank half of it in desperate gulps. Sun Ji watched her with that same calm assessment he'd shown in the restaurant, like he was cataloging information, making calculations she couldn't follow. You will stay in the East Wing, he said finally, gesturing toward a hallway. Follow me. Madison followed on unsteady legs, still clutching the water glass like a lifeline. The hallway was lined with art photographs of urban landscapes at night, all sharp contrasts and deep shadows. They passed a study, a bathroom done in gray stone, and stopped at a bedroom at the end of the hall. Sunji opened the door and stepped back, letting Madison enter first. The room was beautiful, a king-size bed with crisp white linens, another wall of windows with blackout curtains drawn back to show the city below, a dresser, a closet, an attached bathroom she could glimpse through an open door. But what caught Madison's attention, what made her breath catch in her throat, was the lock on the inside of the door. Not a flimsy push-button lock like the one in Gabriel's apartment that he could pop open with a credit card when he decided her privacy was less important than his access. This was a deadbolt. Heavy, serious. The kind of lock that meant something. The lock is yours, Sunji said from the doorway, and Madison turned to find him watching her notice it. I do not have a key. No one does. When you close this door, you are the only person who can open it. Do you understand? Madison stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Control, privacy, safety. Things Gabriel had taken from her so gradually she'd barely noticed until they were gone. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice cracking. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm nobody. Something flickered across Sunji's face, too quick to identify. You are not nobody, he said simply, and I am doing this because it is necessary. He paused, then added, in the closet you will find clothes in various sizes. In the bathroom, toiletries. If you need anything else, there is a phone on the nightstand. Press 1 and it will reach me. Press 2 for the kitchen if you are hungry. He turned to leave, then stopped in the doorway. Madison, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name directly. Gabriel Perry will try to find you. He will call, text, email. He will use your friends, your family, anyone he can manipulate to reach you. He will make promises. He will make threats. He will apologize and rage and beg. Madison's throat tightened. She knew. She'd seen this cycle before, just never from outside it. But he cannot reach you here, Sunji continued. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not unless you choose to let him. That choice is yours. Do you understand? Yours. Madison nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Sunji inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been a bow in another context, and stepped back into the hallway. Good night, Madison Young, he said, and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, Madison just stood there, staring at the closed door. Then, moving like someone in a dream, she walked over and turned the deadbolt. It slid home with a solid click that echoed in the quiet room. Locked. She was locked in, but for the first time in 2 years, that felt like safety instead of imprisonment. Madison turned and surveyed the room that was hers, at least for tonight, the massive bed that she wouldn't have to share. The bathroom where she could cry or shower without someone demanding to know what was taking so long. The windows that showed her the city spread below, distant and glittering and full of possibilities she'd forgotten existed. She set down the water glass and walked to the closet. Inside, just as Sunji had promised, were clothes. Not just women's clothes in a single size like Gabriel had sometimes bought her. Always a size too small. Always with the implication that she should fit into them. These ranged from extra small to extra large. Simple items in neutral colors, sweatpants, t-shirts, button-downs, jeans. Clothes meant for comfort, not display. In the bathroom, she found unopened toiletries. Soap, shampoo, a toothbrush still in its package, skincare products. Everything a person might need to feel human again. Madison caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The yellow dress was wrinkled, makeup smeared, hair disheveled. But there was something different in her eyes. Something that hadn't been there this morning when she'd looked in Gabriel's mirror and given herself the same desperate pep talk she gave herself every day. She looked like someone who'd survived something. Madison turned on the shower, letting the water heat while she peeled off the yellow dress. She'd never wear it again, she decided. Would never want to remember this night by anything except the fact that she'd walked away. As steam filled the bathroom, Madison stepped under the spray and let it wash away the fear and the tears, and the last remnants of the woman who believed she deserved what Gabriel gave her. The water was hot and endless, and hers alone, and for the first time in years, nobody was timing how long she took. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel softer than anything Gabriel had ever bought, Madison found clothes laid out on the bed. She hadn't heard anyone enter, but there they were, sweatpants and a t-shirt in what looked like her size, folded neatly. She dressed quickly, then climbed into the enormous bed, pulling the white comforter up to her chin. The lock on the door stared back at her. Solid, real, hers. Madison closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, fell asleep without fear of what the morning would bring. Madison woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, in a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, wearing clothes that weren't hers. For 3 disorienting seconds, panic seized her chest. Where was she? What had happened? Why wasn't she in Gabriel's apartment bracing for his morning mood? Then it came flooding back. The restaurant. The water glass. The threat. The tattooed man who'd stood between her and Gabriel like a human shield made of quiet certainty. She was safe. She was in Sunji's penthouse. She'd locked the door herself. Her phone sat on the nightstand where she'd left it, face down, and even from here she could hear it vibrating with incoming messages. The sound made her stomach clench, a Pavlovian response to 2 years of monitoring every notification, every call, every demand for her attention disguised as affection. Madison reached for it with trembling fingers, unlocked the screen, and felt her heart drop. 63 messages, 22 missed calls, 14 voicemails. All from Gabriel. The messages started at 11:47 p.m., shortly after she'd fallen asleep. Madison, where are you? Answer your fucking phone. I don't know what that psycho told you, but you need to come home right now. Baby, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Please come home. Then, at 1:23 a.m., I love you. You know I love you. Why are you doing this to me? At 2:15 a.m., if you don't respond in the next hour, I'm calling the police to report you missing. At 3:47 a.m., you're making a huge mistake. That man is dangerous. I'm trying to protect you and you're throwing it in my face. And then, just 20 minutes ago, Madison, please, I need you. I can't do this without you. I'll change, I promise. Just come home and we'll talk about it. I'll get help. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, baby, please. Madison's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The messages blurred together. A toxic cocktail of rage and remorse, threats and love confessions. Everything she'd been conditioned to respond to for 2 years. Part of her, the part Gabriel had carefully cultivated, wanted to text back, wanted to believe the apologies, wanted to think that maybe this time the promises were real. But another part of her, the part that was slowly waking up after a long hibernation, remembered the look in his eyes when he'd screamed that she was dead, remembered his fingers digging into her wrist, remembered 2 years of this exact cycle explosion. Apology, honeymoon period, slow escalation, explosion again. A soft knock on the door made her jump, nearly dropping the phone. Madison. Sunji's voice came through the wood, measured and calm. I have breakfast. May I come in? Madison looked down at herself, borrowed sweatpants, borrowed shirt, hair, probably a disaster. But she unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Sunji stood in the hallway holding a tray with coffee, toast, eggs, and fresh fruit arranged with surprising care. He'd changed from last night's suit into dark pants and a fitted black shirt, his tattoos more visible now in the morning light. He looked rested, composed, completely unbothered by the fact that he'd upended someone's life 12 hours ago. You didn't have to, Madison started. You need to eat, Sunji said simply, carrying the tray to a small table by the windows. He set it down, then noticed her phone still clutched in her hand. The screen lit with Gabriel's messages. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. He has been contacting you. It wasn't a question. Madison nodded, her throat tight. He says he's sorry. He says he loves me. He says what he needs to say to retrieve his possession. Sunji interrupted, his voice cold. That is what you are to him, Madison. Not a person. A possession that has escaped. The words stung because they were true. Madison sank into the chair, staring at the breakfast she didn't think she could eat. I should go to work, she said quietly. I have a job. I have responsibilities. I can't just disappear. Where do you work? Hartley and Associates. I'm an event coordinator. I have a meeting at 9, and if I don't show up, they'll... She stopped, realizing Gabriel knew her schedule, knew where her office was, knew exactly where to find her. You will not go to work today, Sunji said, and before Madison could argue, he continued, because Gabriel Perry will be there. He will wait in the lobby or the parking garage. He will intercept you. He will cause a scene. Or worse, he will convince you to talk to him privately. Do you want that? Madison's chest tightened. No. She didn't want that. The thought of seeing Gabriel in person, of facing his rage or his tears or his manipulation, made her feel physically ill. But I can't just, what am I supposed to do? Hide here forever? He won't stop. He'll call my boss, my friends, my parents. He will have other problems today, Sanji said, settling into the chair across from her. He poured coffee from a French press into a cup and slid it toward her. Drink. And listen. Madison wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. Sanji's dark eyes fixed on her with that same calm intensity that had stopped Gabriel in his tracks last night. Gabriel Perry works for Meridian Capital, Sanji said. Senior Director of Client Relations. He oversees 17 accounts worth approximately $43 million combined. This morning, at 7 a.m., his security credentials were flagged for review. At 8 a.m., his largest client received an anonymous tip about inconsistencies in their portfolio management. At 8:30, his supervisor received documentation of expense reports that do not match company policy. Madison stared at him. How do you... By 9 a.m., when you would be arriving at your office, Gabriel Perry will be in his own office being questioned by internal audit. By noon, he will be suspended pending investigation. He will not have time to wait for you in parking garages. The coffee cup trembled in Madison's hands. You did all that in one night? I made 3 phone calls, Sanji said simply. I did not fabricate anything. The inconsistencies are real. Gabriel Perry has been sloppy with company money because he believed his position made him untouchable. I simply ensured the right people noticed. Madison didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to process the fact that this man had dismantled Gabriel's professional life with 3 phone calls while she'd slept in his guest room. He'll know it was you, she whispered. He'll know you're coming after him. Yes, Sanji agreed. He will. And that knowledge will terrify him far more than any direct confrontation. Let him spend today wondering what else I know, what else I can do. Let him understand that every threat he makes against you will cost him something he values. Madison's phone buzzed again. Another message from Gabriel. She looked down at the screen, at the words, I love you, I need you, please, and felt something crack in her chest. He doesn't love me, she said softly. He never did he? Sanji didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd heard it yet. Love does not threaten. Love does not harm. Love does not trap. Whatever Gabriel Perry feels for you, it is not love. Gabriel is now texting her that he loves her, just hours after threatening her life. Be honest in the comments. Would you have blocked him, or would you be tempted to believe the apology? Type block or forgive. Gabriel Perry's morning began falling apart the moment he tried to badge into the Meridian Capital building at 8:47 a.m. He'd spent the night alternating between rage texting Madison and drinking bourbon straight from the bottle, convinced that by morning she'd come crawling back with apologies. She always did. The pattern was established, reliable as gravity. The card reader beeped red. Access denied. Gabriel frowned, swiped again. Same result. A third time, pressing the card harder against the reader as if force would override the system. Nothing. Mr. Perry? The security guard, Jerome, approached with the uncomfortable expression of someone delivering bad news. I'm going to need you to step aside and speak with building security. What? Jerome, it's me. My badge is just the magnetic strip probably got demagnetized. Just let me through and I'll get a replacement from HR. I can't do that, sir. You've been flagged for credential review. I need you to come with me. 15 minutes later, Gabriel sat in a windowless security office, being told that his building access had been suspended pending an internal investigation. No, they couldn't tell him what investigation. No, he couldn't go to his office to collect his things. No, his supervisor hadn't been informed yet but would be shortly. This is insane, Gabriel said, his voice climbing toward that dangerous register Madison would have recognized. I'm a senior director. I have client meetings today. I have a presentation to the board next week. You can't just lock me out like some... We can, and we are, Mr. Perry, the security manager said, her tone suggesting she'd dealt with entitled executives before and was unimpressed. You'll need to leave the building. Human resources will contact you. Gabriel stormed out, his mind racing. This was a mistake. Had to be. Some bureaucratic glitch or confused identity. He'd call his supervisor, clear this up, be back at his desk by lunch. He pulled out his phone and dialed Richard Thornton, his direct supervisor and the man who'd promoted him to senior director 18 months ago. The call went to voicemail. Gabriel tried again. Voicemail. A third time. And finally Thornton picked up. Gabriel, I'm in a meeting. Richard, there's been some kind of mix-up. Security just locked me out of the building. They're saying something about an investigation, but I have no idea what they're. We need to talk, but not over the phone. I'll call you later. Richard, wait. The line went dead. Gabriel stood on the sidewalk outside Meridian Capital, his building, where his office and his career and his identity lived, and felt the first cold tendril of genuine fear wrap around his chest. 12 blocks away, in a penthouse office that overlooked the financial district like a god surveying his kingdom, Sunji sat at a minimalist desk reviewing documents on 3 monitors. His morning had been productive, methodical, satisfying in the way that precision work always was. The first call had been to a contact in building security, someone who owed Sunji a favor from 3 years ago when Sunji had made a problem disappear. The kind of problem that involved compromising photographs and a very married building manager. That favor had been called in at 6:30 a.m. with a simple request. Flag Gabriel Perry's credentials for review, effective immediately. The second call had been more complex. Sunji had spent 90 minutes the night before reviewing Gabriel Perry's professional history, and what he'd found was exactly what he'd expected. Men like Gabriel were sloppy because arrogance made them feel invincible. They cut corners, bent rules, assumed their charisma would smooth over any inconsistencies. Gabriel had been charging personal expenses to corporate accounts for 18 months. Nothing egregious enough to trigger automatic flags, dinners that could plausibly be client meetings, car services that might be business travel, hotel rooms that could be justified as work trips. But when aggregated and cross-referenced with actual client schedules and meeting notes, a pattern emerged. Gabriel Perry had been stealing, in small increments, for long enough that the total approached 6 figures. Sunji had compiled this information into a detailed report, complete with receipts, credit card statements, and calendar discrepancies. Then he'd sent it anonymously to Meridian Capital's internal audit department and copied the compliance officer. The third call had been the most delicate. Nathaniel Cross was Gabriel's largest client, a portfolio worth $23 million in managed assets. Cross was also someone Sunji had done business with, legitimate business, a real estate deal that had made Cross a considerable profit. They weren't friends, but Cross respected Sunji's judgment. Nathaniel, Sunji had said over his morning coffee, his voice carrying just the right note of concern. I hesitate to bring this to you, but I believe your interests may not be as protected as you think at Meridian. Sunji didn't make accusations. He didn't need to. He simply raised questions. Had Nathaniel noticed that his account's performance lagged behind comparable portfolios? Had he reviewed the fee structure recently? Had anyone explained why certain assets had been moved multiple times in the past quarter, each move generating transaction fees? I'm not suggesting malfeasance, Sunji had said smoothly. Simply that perhaps a detailed review of your account management might be prudent. By 9:15 a.m., Nathaniel Cross had called Meridian Capital demanding a full audit of his portfolio and threatening to pull his assets if he didn't like what he found. Now Sunji watched his monitors as emails flew through Meridian Capital's executive servers. He didn't hack systems himself, but he employed people who did, and watching Gabriel Perry's professional world collapse in real time was worth the expense. The audit department had already flagged 16 suspicious transactions. HR had scheduled an emergency meeting. Cross's threat to leave was being escalated to the managing partners. Gabriel Perry's phone was probably exploding with messages he couldn't answer because he was locked out of the building, unable to access his files, unable to defend himself, unable to do anything but watch his carefully constructed corporate identity crumble like sand. Sunji allowed himself a small smile. This was what he excelled at, identifying weak points and applying pressure with surgical precision. Gabriel had built his sense of self on his job title, his income, his status. Strip those away and what remained? A loud man in a room that was suddenly very, very quiet. One of Sunji's phones buzzed. A text from his contact in Meridian's HR department. Suspension effective immediately. Pending investigation. He's losing his mind. Sunji typed back. Keep me informed. Another monitor showed social media, where Gabriel had just posted a rambling status about wrongful termination and corporate conspiracies. Sunji made a note to have that documented. Men like Gabriel always incriminated themselves when they panicked. They couldn't help it. The door to his office opened and one of his men entered, the same one who'd positioned himself by the restaurant door last night. Boss. Perry tried to go back to his apartment. He's locked out. Landlord says his rent check bounced. Sunji raised an eyebrow. I didn't touch his bank accounts. No, sir. But his credit card company flagged unusual activity, all those charges from last night when he was drunk texting. They froze his accounts pending fraud review. His automatic rent payment didn't go through. Sunji almost laughed. Sometimes destruction didn't require manipulation. Sometimes men like Gabriel destroyed themselves and you just had to clear the path. Make sure the landlord knows about the investigation at Meridian, Sunji said. Professional courtesy. He deserves to know his tenant might have legal problems. The man nodded and left. Sunji returned to his monitors, to the cascade of consequences spreading through Gabriel Perry's life like cracks through ice. By this afternoon, Gabriel would be unemployed or suspended. By tomorrow, possibly evicted. By next week, his professional reputation would be toxic. And through it all, Gabriel would know exactly who was responsible. Would understand that the man with the tattooed neck and the quiet voice had meant every word he'd said in that restaurant. Would learn that threats had consequences. Would realize that Madison Young was no longer within his reach, and trying to reach her would only make things worse. Sunji's phone lit up with a message from Madison. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say except thank you." He typed back simply, "You are safe. That is enough." Then he returned to his work, to the careful demolition of a man who'd thought volume made him powerful. By the time Sunji was finished, Gabriel Perry would understand the difference between noise and force, between intimidation and actual power, between hurting someone weaker and facing someone who hit back. The lesson would be thorough. Sunji always was. The first week, Madison mostly slept. Her body seemed to understand before her mind did that she was safe, and it demanded payment for 2 years of hypervigilance. She'd wake at noon, disoriented, panicking that she'd missed some obligation or broken some unspoken rule, before remembering where she was. Sunji never commented on her schedule. He simply ensured there was food when she emerged. A quiet presence that asked nothing of her except that she heal. The second week, she started exploring the penthouse. Sunji was gone most days, conducting whatever business a man like him conducted, and Madison found herself alone in a space that felt more like a museum than a home. She discovered a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, books in multiple languages ranging from philosophy to architecture to poetry. She found a kitchen stocked with ingredients she didn't recognize and wouldn't know how to use. She spent hours at the windows, watching the city move below her like a living organism, feeling separate from it in a way that was liberating rather than lonely. By the third week, Madison realized she hadn't worn yellow since that night, hadn't worn any of the bright colors Gabriel had insisted, made her look approachable, feminine, soft. The clothes in the guest room closet ran toward neutrals, blacks, grays, deep blues, and she found herself drawn to them, to the way they felt like armor rather than advertisement. She wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, and when she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she looked like someone different, someone harder, someone who might survive. Sunji noticed. He noticed everything. She was learning. "The color suits you," he said one evening, when they shared dinner in the penthouse's dining room, a habit that had developed organically after Madison had stopped hiding in her room. "Gabriel always said I looked washed out in dark colors," Madison replied, then immediately regretted bringing him up. They rarely spoke about Gabriel, though his ghost haunted the edges of every conversation. Gabriel said many things that were not true. Sunji said simply, and that was the end of it. The fourth week, Madison asked if she could paint. She'd been an artist once, before Gabriel, had spent weekends covered in acrylics and turpentine, losing herself in color and canvas in the pure joy of creation. Gabriel had called it a hobby, had told her real adults didn't waste time on childish pursuits, had gradually boxed up her supplies and relegated them to a closet until she'd stopped asking to retrieve them. Sunji converted one of his spare rooms into a studio within 24 hours. North-facing windows for consistent light, professional easels, paints in every color, brushes of every size, canvas stretched and ready. Madison had stood in the doorway and cried, overwhelmed by the casual generosity of someone giving her back a piece of herself she'd thought was gone forever. She painted through the 5th and 6th weeks, rediscovering the rhythm of brush against canvas, the meditation of mixing colors, the satisfaction of bringing something into existence that hadn't been there before. Her first pieces were angry, all sharp edges and violent reds, slashes of black that looked like wounds. Sunji walked through the studio once, studied them silently, and said only, "Good, let it out." By the 7th week, the paintings began to soften. Not gentle, but less raw. She painted the city from the penthouse windows, painted abstract interpretations of freedom that looked like birds or flames or something between the two, painted a portrait of hands releasing something precious, letting it fly away. Sunji commissioned 3 pieces for his office, paid her the market rate for an emerging artist, refused to negotiate when she protested. "Your work has value," he said. "Act like it." In the 8th week, Madison started helping with Sunji's legitimate businesses. He owned several. She learned real estate holdings, a security consulting firm, investments in tech startups. She had experience in event planning, and he had a charity gala coming up for a foundation that provided resources to domestic violence survivors. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They worked side by side in his office, Madison coordinating vendors and venues, while Sunji handled the financial logistics with the same precision he brought to everything. She learned that he was patient when explaining things, never condescending when she asked questions, comfortable with silence when words weren't necessary. They developed a rhythm. She'd bring him coffee without asking. He'd order dinner from restaurants she mentioned liking. They'd work late into the evening with nothing but the sound of keyboards in the city humming below. Their conversations deepened. Madison told him about her childhood, about parents who'd loved her but hadn't known how to help when Gabriel isolated her from them, about dreams she'd abandoned because Gabriel had mocked them, about the slow erosion of self that happened so gradually she hadn't noticed until she'd almost disappeared completely. Sunji rarely spoke about his past, but pieces emerged in fragments. A childhood in Seoul before his family immigrated, a father who'd taught him that power without control was just chaos. Years building an organization from nothing, learning that respect meant more than fear, that the quietest voice in the room was often the most dangerous. He told her about the tattoos on his neck, each one earned, each one representing a promise kept or a debt settled, a history written on skin because some things shouldn't be forgotten. "Do you regret it?" Madison asked one night, wine making her brave enough to ask the question that had been circling her mind for weeks. "The life you chose, the things you've done." Sunji considered this, swirling whiskey in his glass as he looked out at the city lights. "I regret nothing I have done to protect people who could not protect themselves," he said finally. "I regret some things I have done for profit or pride, but the line between the two is clearer than people think. And which category do I fall into?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not a category, Madison. You are a person who deserved better than what she received. Helping you required no calculation. It required only seeing and acting. Anyone who claims they would not have done the same is either a liar or a coward." By the 9th week, Madison realized she hadn't checked Gabriel's social media in days. Hadn't wondered what he was doing or if he was okay or if he was sorry. The obsessive need to monitor him, to predict his moods and preempt his anger, had faded like a scar losing its color. She knew from Sunji's periodic updates that Gabriel had been fired from Meridian, that he'd moved to a cheaper apartment, that his attempts to contact her had dwindled from dozens of messages daily to occasional drunk texts she never opened. He was becoming irrelevant, a chapter that was closed. In the 10th week, Madison wore red for the first time since leaving the Zenith. Not yellow, that color still carried too much baggage, but red, bold and unapologetic, the color of someone who wasn't hiding anymore. Sunji said nothing when she walked into the kitchen that morning, but something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been pride or approval, or maybe just recognition that the woman standing before him bore little resemblance to the terrified girl in the yellow dress. "The gala is in 2 weeks, she said, pouring coffee like it was any other morning. "Everything's confirmed. Venue, catering, entertainment, security. We're expecting about 300 guests." "You have done excellent work," Sunji said. Madison smiled a real smile, not the practiced one she'd worn for Gabriel. "I'm good at this. I'd forgotten that I'm actually good at something." "You are good at many things," Sunji replied. "You simply needed space to remember." They worked in comfortable silence after that, planning the final details of an event that would bring together business leaders and philanthropists to raise money for people like Madison used to be. People trapped in situations they couldn't escape alone, people who needed someone to see them and act. And as Madison sat in Sunji's penthouse office, wearing red, planning events, creating art, reclaiming pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever, she realized something that would have terrified her 2 months ago. She wasn't planning to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This strange partnership with a man society would call a criminal, but who'd shown her more respect than any good man ever had, it felt like the first honest thing in her life in years. Sunji looked up from his computer and caught her watching him. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," Madison said. "Just, thank you. For all of this. You have already thanked me. I know. But I'll probably keep doing it anyway." Sunji's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close. "Then I will keep accepting it." And in that moment, in the space between gratitude and understanding, something shifted between them that neither of them named but both of them felt. The ballroom of the Meridian Grand was transformed into an elegant sanctuary of soft lighting and understated luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece a careful arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus. 300 guests in evening wear mingled with champagne flutes, their conversations creating a sophisticated hum beneath the string quartet playing near the entrance. Madison had coordinated every detail, and seeing it come together perfectly filled her with a pride she'd almost forgotten how to feel. She stood near the stage in a dress that made her feel like someone new. Not yellow, never yellow again. This was deep emerald green, elegant and striking, with a neckline that showed her collarbones and her confidence. Her hair was swept up, her makeup precise, her posture straight. She looked like someone who belonged in rooms like this. Someone who'd earned her place rather than apologized for occupying space. Sunji stood beside her in a tailored black suit, his tattooed neck partially visible above his crisp white shirt. He'd made no effort to hide them tonight. And Madison noticed how people's eyes flickered to the ink, then to his face, trying to reconcile the elegance of his appearance with the clear markers of a life lived outside their carefully constructed rules. He seemed unbothered by their assessment. His attention focused on Madison as she directed last-minute adjustments to the sound system. "The auctioneer is ready," one of the event staff informed her. "Should we begin?" Madison checked her watch. "Give it 5 more minutes. A few VIP guests are still arriving." She felt Sunji's presence beside her like a steady anchor. Over the past 2 months, she'd grown accustomed to it, the way he occupied space without demanding attention, the way his silence felt supportive rather than threatening, the way he seemed to understand what she needed before she asked. Tonight he was here as both the Foundation's primary benefactor and as her. What? Partner felt too intimate. Friend felt insufficient. Whatever label fit, he was here. And that made her feel safe in a way she was still learning to trust. The ballroom doors opened and Madison turned to greet the late arrivals, her professional smile already in place. Then she saw him, and her entire body went rigid. Gabriel. He looked nothing like the polished corporate climber who'd screamed at her in the Zenith 2 months ago. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his face carrying the gray pallor of someone who'd been drinking too much and sleeping too little. His eyes scanned the ballroom with wild desperation until they landed on Madison, and something feral crossed his features. "Oh my God," Madison whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for Sunji's arm. "He's here. Gabriel's here." Sunji followed her gaze, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. He made a subtle gesture, and 2 of his men, positioned strategically around the ballroom in the guise of security, began moving toward the entrance. But Gabriel was already pushing through the crowd, shoving past a woman in a sequined gown, ignoring the startled protests of guests he jostled aside. His focus was singular, locked on Madison with an intensity that made her blood turn to ice. "Madison." His voice cut through the sophisticated murmur like a knife. "Madison, we need to talk." The string quartet faltered. Conversations died. 300 heads turned to watch the disheveled man stumbling toward the stage where Madison stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sunji stepped partially in front of her, a subtle shift that put his body between Madison and Gabriel's trajectory. "You are not welcome here," he said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "Leave now." "Fuck you," Gabriel spat, his face contorting with rage. "This is between me and my girlfriend." "Madison, baby, please, just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Madison found her voice, though it shook. "I'm not your girlfriend, Gabriel. I haven't been for 2 months. You need to leave." 2 months, Gabriel repeated, his laugh bitter and unhinged. 2 months you've been hiding here with this criminal, and you think that changes anything? You think you can just walk away from 2 years because some tattooed thug gave you a place to crash? He was closer now, close enough that Madison could smell the alcohol on his breath, could see the red vessels in his eyes, could recognize the particular brand of desperation that came from a man whose entire world had collapsed and needed someone to blame. "I lost everything because of you," Gabriel continued, his voice rising to that familiar pitch that used to make her flinch. "My job, my apartment, my reputation, all because you couldn't handle a little argument, all because you ran to him and let him destroy my life." "You destroyed your own life," Sunji said, his tone factual rather than accusatory. Madison simply stopped being part of it. Gabriel's face went purple. "I wasn't talking to you. You fucking..." He lunged forward, trying to push past Sunji to reach Madison, and several things happened simultaneously. Sunji caught Gabriel's wrist with casual efficiency, stopping his momentum without apparent effort. The 2 security personnel reached them, flanking Gabriel on either side, and Madison, instead of shrinking back, stepped forward to stand beside Sunji. "Don't touch him," she said, her voice stronger now. "Gabriel, look at me." Gabriel's wild eyes fixed on her, and she saw everything she'd once mistaken for love revealed as its true form: possession, control, the desperate grasping of someone who defined himself by what he could dominate. "You don't get to do this," Madison said. "You don't get to show up at my event, at a charity gala for domestic violence survivors, and scream at me like you own me. You don't own me. You never did." "I love you," Gabriel said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Madison, I love you. Everything I did because I love you. You're mine. You'll always be mine." "No," Madison said simply. "I'm not." Gabriel's face twisted and he lunged again, breaking free from Sanji's grip with the strength of pure desperation. "You're coming home with me right now. You hear me? Right now. You think you can—" His hand shot out to grab her arm, to reclaim the physical control he'd once wielded so effectively, and Madison didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't cower. She stood perfectly still and let him reach for her, let his fingers almost close around her wrist. And then Sanji moved. It wasn't violent, wasn't dramatic. Sanji simply intercepted Gabriel's hand mid-air, his grip iron but controlled, and leaned in close enough that only Gabriel could hear what he said next. Madison couldn't make out the words, but she watched Gabriel's face drain of all color, watched his body go rigid with fear, watched the fight leak out of him like air from a punctured tire. When Sanji released him, Gabriel stumbled backward, his bravado completely shattered. "You can't, this isn't Madison, please. Escort Mr. Perry from the building," Sanji said to his security team, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone whose orders were never questioned. "Ensure he understands he is not to return. Ever. To any property I own, any event Madison coordinates, any space she occupies. Make it very clear." The security team took Gabriel by each arm, not roughly but firmly, and began walking him toward the exit. Gabriel twisted back, trying to catch Madison's eyes one last time. "This isn't over. Madison, you can't do this to me. I'll..." The ballroom doors closed behind him, cutting off whatever threat he'd been about to make. For a long moment, the 300 guests stood in stunned silence, processing the scene they'd just witnessed. Then someone began to clap, slowly at first, then joined by others, until the entire ballroom was applauding not for the drama, but for Madison, standing tall in her emerald dress, having just publicly rejected the man who'd tried to claim her as property. Madison's legs felt unsteady, adrenaline making her hands shake, but she didn't collapse. She turned to the microphone on the stage, her voice only slightly trembling as she said, "Thank you all for your patience. Let's continue with tonight's program. We have an auction that will change lives, and I'd hate for one man's issues to derail it." Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and supportive, and Madison felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd faced Gabriel, stood her ground, said no in front of hundreds of witnesses, and she was still standing. Sanji's hand touched her lower back, brief and reassuring, before he stepped away to let her take the stage. As Madison introduced the auctioneer and the gala resumed its elegant rhythm, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the ballroom's mirrors. The woman looking back at her was strong, unbroken, free. The gala ended at midnight with over $500,000 raised for the foundation. Madison stood near the emptying ballroom, accepting congratulations from departing guests who praised both the event's execution and her composure during what they delicately referred to as that unfortunate interruption. She smiled and thanked them, her professional mask firmly in place, but exhaustion was beginning to seep into her bones. The adrenaline that had carried her through Gabriel's intrusion was fading, leaving behind a hollow, shaky feeling. Sanji materialized at her elbow as the last guests filtered out. "The car is ready," he said quietly. "You should rest." Madison nodded, gathering her clutch and the folder of final receipts she'd need to review tomorrow. They walked through the service corridor toward the private exit, Sanji's security team maintaining a discreet perimeter. The hallway was dimly lit, utilitarian compared to the ballroom's elegance, and their footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. They were almost to the exit when a door slammed open behind them and Gabriel's voice rang out, slurred and desperate. "Madison, wait, you have to listen to me." Madison spun around to find Gabriel stumbling toward them, having apparently evaded or overwhelmed whoever was supposed to ensure he left the premises. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt untucked, his eyes wild with the particular recklessness of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "I told you this wasn't over," Gabriel said, his words tumbling over each other. "You think you can humiliate me like that? In front of all those people? Make me look like some kind of monster?" Sanji's men moved to intercept, but Madison held up her hand, stopping them. Something had shifted in her during the past 2 months. Something fundamental and irreversible, and she realized she needed to do this herself. Needed to be the one to end it. Not as a victim being protected, but as a person reclaiming her own voice. "Let him speak," Madison said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. She stepped forward, deliberately positioning herself in front of Sunji, rather than behind him. "Gabriel, what do you want?" Gabriel blinked, surprised by her directness. I want you to stop this insanity. To come home. To remember that we love each other. That we built something together. 2 years. Madison, 2 years doesn't just disappear because you had some kind of breakdown." "I didn't have a breakdown," Madison said calmly. "I had a breakthrough. There's a difference." "You're brainwashed," Gabriel insisted, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "He's got you living in his penthouse, working for him, probably fucking him." "Stop," Madison interrupted, her voice cutting through his rant like a blade. "You don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to tell me what I'm thinking or feeling or doing. You don't get to define my reality." "I'm trying to save you," Gabriel shouted. "From him. From this life. You think a man like that gives a shit about you? You think you're special to him? You're just another broken thing he picked up. And when he's done with you..." "I was broken when I was with you," Madison said, and the simple truth of it seemed to hit Gabriel like a physical blow. "Every day with you, I became less of myself, smaller, quieter, more afraid. You didn't love me, Gabriel. You loved having control over someone who couldn't fight back." Gabriel's face contorted with rage. "That's bullshit. I gave you everything. A home, stability, security. You gave me nothing I didn't pay for in fear," Madison said. "And you took everything that made me who I was. My art, my friends, my family, my confidence, my peace. You took it all and convinced me I should be grateful." You're twisting everything." Gabriel was shaking now, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Madison, baby, please. I made mistakes, okay? I'll admit that. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I can change. I can be better. Just give me another chance. One more chance." Madison looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the charming man who'd swept her off her feet 3 years ago with expensive dates and constant attention. Not the monster who'd screamed death threats over spilled water. Just a deeply insecure man who'd built his identity on controlling someone weaker and couldn't function without that dynamic. "Do you remember what you said to me at the Zenith?" Madison asked quietly. "You said I'd be dead when we got home. I didn't mean it literally. I didn't mean..." "I know exactly what you meant," Madison interrupted. "You meant to terrify me. To remind me that when we were alone, behind closed doors, you had all the power, and I had none. You meant to ensure I spent the entire car ride home afraid, wondering what you'd do, how bad it would be. That's what you meant." Gabriel opened his mouth to protest, but Madison continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But here's what you need to understand, Gabriel. I'm not dead. I'm standing here, stronger than I've been in years, looking at you without fear for the first time since I don't know when. I'm alive. I'm free. I'm choosing my own path." She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but absolutely certain. "But you are dead to me. Not as a threat, not as a promise, as a simple fact. You no longer exist in my world. You have no power over my thoughts, my choices, my future. You're just gone." The words hung in the air between them, final and irrevocable. Gabriel's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally a desperate, grasping panic. You don't get to know. No." He lunged forward, his hand rising in a familiar motion that Madison's body recognized before her mind. Did the backhand he'd used in their apartment when words stopped working, when he needed to reassert physical dominance. But this time, Madison didn't flinch, didn't cower. She simply stood still and watched as Sunji's hand intercepted Gabriel's wrist mid-swing, stopping the blow with effortless precision. Sunji pulled Gabriel close enough that their faces were inches apart, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "If you ever attempt to contact her again, to find her, to speak her name, I will ensure you understand the full measure of your mistake. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Do you understand me?" Whatever Gabriel saw in Sunji's eyes in that moment drained the last of his resistance. He nodded frantically, his breath coming in short gasps, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Sunji released him and Gabriel stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Madison, please." "Goodbye, Gabriel," Madison said, and turned her back on him, walking toward the exit without looking back. She heard him make one last desperate sound, something between a sob and a protest, but she kept walking. Sunji fell into step beside her, his hand briefly touching her back, not guiding, not controlling, just present, and his security team formed a quiet barrier between them and Gabriel's crumbling form. The night air hit Madison's face as they stepped outside, cool and clean and full of possibilities. The car waited at the curb, but Madison paused for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of 2 years finally lift from her shoulders. "Are you all right?" Sanji asked. Madison turned to look at him, this man who'd stepped between her and violence, who'd given her space to heal, who'd treated her with more respect in 2 months than Gabriel had in 2 years. "I am," she said, and realized it was true. "I really am." They got into the car together, partners in a way that transcended simple labels. As the driver pulled away from the Meridian Grand, Madison looked back once at the building where she'd faced her past and declared her freedom. Gabriel was a small figure in the distance, alone on the sidewalk, growing smaller with every second. "Thank you," Madison said quietly. "For everything." Sanji glanced at her, something almost like a smile touching his features. "You did this yourself." "I simply ensured you had the space to do it." And as they drove through the city toward the penthouse that had become her sanctuary, Madison understood that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She was free, and whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. It took a criminal to teach Gabriel about respect. If you believe that real strength is protecting others, not hurting them, subscribe to the channel right now. Don't let stories like Madison's go unheard.